Testing.
Testing, testing. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. We're talking about DeFi in emerging markets. My name is Brandon Potts, and I'm with Framework Ventures. We're an early-stage venture firm focused entirely on crypto. Would love to just run down the line here and allow everyone a moment to introduce themselves. Why don't we start here, sir?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Victor Teixeira. I'm the crypto economist at Canza Finance. Our focus is really kind of building TradFi and DeFi solutions in Africa and kind of bridging that gap between the two kind of sides on the continent where there's really no real institutional kind of framework for those types of solutions.
I'm Chris Duffus, founder and CEO of Fonbnk, and we provide on and off ramps to and from Web3, targeting mobile-first, cash-based economies like Sub-Saharan Africa. And what makes us unique is that we use prepaid airtime and mobile money as mediums of exchange. So think M-Pesa meets Uniswap.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is Isabella from dappOS. dappOS is a Web3 operating protocol that manages the layer between users and blockchains to provide easy, convenient, and efficient interactions for users to use any blockchain services.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Paulo David. I'm a third-time entrepreneur. I'm from Brazil. I've been in the fintech space since 2014. And since last year, I'm building AmFi. We are leading the space in Brazil in terms of building regulated financial products on chain. And it's a pleasure being here with you all.
All right. Well, would be remiss to not start the panel with just a quick question, but super helpful contextually. Why emerging markets? There's so much talk on developed markets, the permission thesis, and not to necessarily go that route, but very keen to hear your opinions or your views or your thesis on why emerging markets, right? Is it a function of them perhaps being underserved? Is it the inflation hedge? A number of different reasons that we kind of hear, repeated by founders focusing in these areas. But would like to hear your opinions on, why you're building what you're building and on the mission that you are.
Okay, can I start? So we are building in Brazil, and I think that there are three main reasons to build in Brazil. For example, first is the market. We are talking about more than 200 people population, 16 million of them own a crypto asset, 75% of the transactions in Brazil, the financial transactions happens online, mobile, and it's a huge market that even institutionals are adopting tokenization and blockchain. And I would say that Brazil is probably the most sophisticated financial industry nowadays, and we have more than 1,000 fintech companies in this space, so many different systems being developed in order to create financial products. Just one example, the instant payment in Brazil was created 2 years ago, and only last year we had more than $2.1 trillion being transacted on top of that. So I think Brazil, it's a very nice market in terms of financial innovation. Secondly, we have a regulator that is extremely favorable to this new technology. So I've been witnesses that at first hand, how the Central Bank of Brazil is discussing about the tokenization, innovation, blockchain. So I really think that it's very good to develop in an ecosystem that the regulator is open to that. And third, you have major problems there. So service providers, many systems, it's difficult to integrate with other systems in Brazil. It's high cost of transaction. So whenever you have the benefits of the blockchain, it's perfect because you can solve real-world problems. So I'm extremely bullish about the market and the possibilities in Brazil.
Yeah, so maybe if I touch on kind of the African market on the other side, I think the value there is that really, first of all, you have 1.1 billion people with an average age of 19, with an entrepreneurship rate of about 20%. It's the world's largest population of digital native business people. And they're fundamentally underserved by everything across the market. There's really no kind of business solution in terms of the banking. Everything's kind of based off the retail backbone. And then beyond that, I think at the end of the day, in terms of what we're doing in terms of enacting change, is that if we try to build DeFi solutions and kind of bring these solutions across to developed markets like the US, Asia, and Europe, we're solving basis points types of issues, right? When we're talking about Africa, we're talking about percentage points. And so that's a significant spread that is really kind of constantly putting the continent really on the back foot. And has done for a number of years. And I think really the permissionless benefits that DeFi especially and kind of the broader crypto space brings into play really gives us the opportunity to kind of take it to the next level and allow them to leapfrog a lot of that really archaic technology that's really the backbone of the fintech space in the continent. So that's really where we see the value, is that it's really a market where we don't really have to try to take them through the steps individually. We can really kind of do those kind of those big steps and kind of leapfrog ahead and forward.
Nice.
I might add that, especially sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, imagine if the US was 50 different countries, right? And each state or country required its own banking license, and if you went across the border, none of your financial products work. Well, that's the continent of Africa, and multiply that times 10. If you've looked at the Mercator map, you can literally drop the U.S., North America, South America, Western Europe, India, all into the continent, and it's and because of that, that's why you've not seen any scale businesses like the Amazon of the African continent, because whether it's payments infrastructure, logistics infrastructure, it's all broken. No one trusts one another. And the other thing I might add too, why Africa, why many emerging markets, it's because of those reasons why this is why we should be there, right? It's the highest and best use case of decentralized finance. People don't trust one another, very tribal, let alone they don't trust their governments. The infrastructure is broken. They've always lived in a dollarized and parallel economy system because of that. And so it's a tremendous opportunity to make an impact, but also I think use as a test ground, test for bringing that new innovation back to the US and Western markets once we solve some of these fundamental issues emerging.
Yeah, first I want to add up to what Paulo has said. I know there are some governments in emerging markets are also looking into use blockchain services to increase the efficiency and also transparency. I think in Brazil, governments are also looking into using blockchains for tax, right? So this is exact applications that those governments are trying, and it's definitely a good signal, a positive signal for us, because we all know that the regulatory is really a pain for this industry. And I think for dappOS, we just look at numbers. Like there's a recent survey as of 2023, the global crypto users adoption is about 4.2%, which means there are around 420 million crypto users around the globe. But let's guess, who has the most adoption rate? Which country has the most adoption rate?
Nigeria.
Where?
Nigeria.
No. It's Vietnam. So Vietnam has about 20.54% adoption. Who's the next? Okay, Iran. some Iran, yeah, 13.66 or something, and then followed by USA, 13.22. So actually, we see that the adoption rate globally, we see the huge potential in the emerging markets. So that is like the most fundamental reasons that we will go for it, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I love that. It dovetails very nicely into an example that I often like to share is, as it relates to adoption rates, us in the quote-unquote West or developed markets, I think we overlook the opportunity sometimes. And I like to baseline to the fact that one of the largest use cases for blockchain in emerging markets is USDT Tether on Tron. And I think many of us in this room are probably aware of that, but you'd be surprised to the number of folks who frankly are not. And so what I'd like to ask is just, what are you experiencing, what are you seeing on the ground as it relates to some of the current customer behaviors in emerging markets? What are they demanding, or what are they wanting? What are they doing with respect to blockchains? And what's, if you could perhaps provide a specific example, walk us through maybe a user flow, that'd be great as well.
Yeah, perhaps I could kind of start and talk a bit about the agent market in Nigeria. I think that's actually a fascinating kind of test case of what's kind of happened. In terms of the agent market, just to kind of give you guys a primer, a lot of the liquidity in Nigeria you can't actually get from a bank. You have to go to an agent and you have to swap from US dollars to Naira through an agent. Usually the traditional model was he'd have an overseas bank account, He'd pay you out in the overseas bank account, and you'd take your money locally, and then he'd recycle it his way through kind of their systems where they have a hierarchy of agents. In 2020, it started kind of picking up where they started using USDT as liquidity there. And really the funny thing is that now there's deeper liquidity in USDT than there is in US dollar fiat. So when you're actually getting quoted on the street in Nigeria, you're actually getting quoted in US dollar tether, not fiat.
Right.
And so that's absolutely fascinating there. And I think in terms of the user base, and I think really kind of the main driver behind Tron is that it's a very fee-sensitive consumer base. And I think that's really kind of where the focus is that they're very, very focused on how do I get it for the cheapest transaction fees? How do I actually move the money without actually having that slippage? Because really every other part of kind of their economy really depends on these kind of significant frictionalities in terms of prices that they have to pay. So I think that's really the interesting part of the user base there. But I also think that the fascinating thing is that, as you say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't get them to drink it. But if you find a very thirsty horse, they will drink it. And I think in terms of the market, you end up in a situation where it's a market which has really been underserved really, really badly over at least the last 50 years. They haven't had the opportunity to be on equal footing with anybody else for at least 100. And so in terms of the solutions that they're looking for in the market, they're very, very keen to learn new things, which is kind of a different hurdle that kind of exists in Europe or Western markets, where especially in the tech space, we always think, oh, well, who will actually use it? How do I actually teach the behaviors to actually get this done? Versus there, we actually kind of get the opposite of it. Hey, how do I learn how to do this? What kind of are the opportunities here? And I think that's really a fascinating kind of different part of the profile there.
Right. Well, they say necessity is the mother of all innovation. And I definitely agree with the sort of leapfrogging thesis that you alluded to earlier in the sense of adoption. And these markets ultimately comes home to the developed markets with net new use cases.
Oh, absolutely.
One use case that we see a lot is dollarized micropayments. I'll give you an example. Let's say you were a big Game of Thrones fan, and so what someone in Nigeria might do is they'd get a subscription to HBO Go or Max or whatever it is, but they'd have to get a dollar credit card issued by some U.S. issuer to make payment. And so the types of applications that we support is someone literally, could convert their Naira into USDC and fund the purchase of a dollar card to then, fund their subscription of HBO Go. By the way, you're limited in the amount of dollar forex that you can obtain from your bank. Technically, it's like $20, but it also could be capriciously applied. And so, as you think about sort of what your consumption habits are in the West, hey, I have a subscription to Spotify, Netflix, all these other different services. I run a small business, so I have like a Wix page, et cetera. That's what folks are doing, and they can't get enough dollars to access that, especially if you think about yourself in one of these particular types of countries, and it limits your opportunity in a significant way, and it's why people are finding these, learning the behaviors to make it happen to operate their lives.
Yeah, I think Victor and Christian just said most of what I have in mind. I just quickly think of another one that might also be interesting as a use case. Is like a GameFi. Like we all know that I think 2 years ago there's a surge in the Axie Infinity, and the users in Vietnam, right? They use this as their job. Like they literally do this as their daily jobs, and they make money, they earn their salaries, they raise their families with this. I feel real applications has to be connected to their daily lives to make it, to make it a massive adoptable service.
Nice. I would say that in Brazil we are facing more. I would not say bigger use case, but I would say like you see maps adoption or the signs of maps adoption becoming from the institutionals. So for example, in our company, we are working with like big banks and with like large asset managers, and they understand that tokenization and the blockchain and creating financial products on chain will be the evolution of the fintech industry. So we see many aspects of the financial market moving into that direction. Also, for example, 2 weeks ago, there was the launch of the CBDC in Brazil, and in a super nutshell, the CBDC in Brazil will be a framework on how financial institutions will work and will exchange information with the central bank. But on top of that, all financial institutions can create their own stablecoin in order to communicate and exchange data with their clients. We know the financial market in Brazil, and it's very difficult for them even to create like a dashboard. Imagine how they are going to create their own stablecoins. And then you have an announcement from Brazil that Brazil and China, the biggest partner of Brazil, will not use dollar anymore. Maybe it will be true, maybe it won't. But in 1 or 2 years, probably there will be many opportunities to develop like financial products on how a partner in Brazil can exchange with China, for example. So we see massive things going on as we speak, and we have like that in our company, for example. Like we are seeing the growth and how we are getting like involved with very, very large players, and that's what we are seeing in Brazil.
If I could just piggyback off that really quickly, I think an interesting thing is, especially in the African market, when we traditionally think about the African market, we really think retail. The reality is that businesses actually import 95% of their goods from overseas. So most consumer goods aren't manufactured in Africa, they're actually imported from abroad. So the institutional aspect and kind of the enterprise solutions are also a massive use case, especially in the continent. Now, I think the difference between Africa and Brazil in that standpoint is in Brazil, the banks have kind of led the way and the regulator has been quite open and supportive of new initiatives. On the continent, it is, as Chris said, it's 54 different countries, 54 different regulators. So there hasn't been that support. That being said, the businesses, again, they are kind of the same resilient type of individuals that are really keen on finding new solutions, new ways of how they can actually bring in new technologies to kind of make their businesses more efficient. And that's also a massive market that I think we don't necessarily think of when we consider about emerging markets and DeFi adoption in Africa, but it's actually kind of really a large untapped market in our view.
Right. Yeah, I mean, more often than not, when we talk about emerging market use cases, we're thinking of retail, the everyday person and everyday, sort of use case, which is certainly very important. And to your point, we still need to figure out sort of that last mile, if you will.
Or
but
last few inches.
Last few witches?
Yeah, that's a bottleneck in many cases.
Okay. What is the last few witches
It's
refer
really
to?
it's some simple person doesn't have a bank account, they have cash, and they want to tap into this sophisticated sort of network, right? And you can get it to them like, everyone has mobile phones, but, it stops at those last few inches. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges in financial inclusion or digital inclusion for many folks across emerging markets.
Wow. Well, I mean, remaining in this same line of thinking, would love to just highlight what are maybe the main friction points, things that we should be identifying and thinking about as it relates to, B2B perhaps, but also B2C. Like, what are the main friction points that are preventing people from interacting with the broader on-chain economy, with blockchains, with everything that's been built to date and everything that we're developing moving forward?
This is a very good question, Brendan, and this is something that makes me like wake up during the night, many nights. But I would say like there are like very specific problems of like English barrier, or sometimes like stake barriers on terms of what type of device do you use. Like Brazil, mass adoption of WhatsApp. And people don't use Discord or Twitter, and the community on Web3, it's based on a different stack. And when you need to say like you need to use like a wallet, but that's not even the problem. Like they cannot communicate with emergent markets properly, and we have been facing that because once we launched the company in Brazil, it was mainly in English, all the materials, and even like the big financial institutions, even the asset managers, they were not so comfortable in discussing and integrating and having like English-based language in order to use the financial products, because that's not how it happened. And secondly, and I know that it's very strange to mention that here in this event, it's many people, I would say, it's not prepared to work with a global company in terms of not having someone locally based. Once we start developing technology in Brazil for the Brazilian market, we had like a nice welcome from the industry, mainly because we were Brazilians and they know us and they know that we are going to create something that's going to be adjusted to the market. So I would say like there are large barriers, but sometimes it's like the small things that we can adapt in order to welcome more people into this amazing world. So.
Right, scaling out the social layer, the layer zero, if you will, huge unlock.
I think just to kind of like really quickly, the language thing is massive, especially in Africa. You have over 300 different languages. The whole swathes of Africa that don't speak English whatsoever. French or Portuguese are kind of lingua franca in certain regions. And that's absolutely something where, funnily enough, we found a lot of kind of educational materials really interesting to pull it from Brazil and take it to countries like Angola, Cape Verde, Mozambique, because there's kind of that overlap, and then doing the same to bring kind of that education from France and over into French-speaking countries. So that's definitely kind of a big thing that's a hurdle that often, especially since we're quite anglicized, I think, across blockchain as a whole, we don't really kind of think of that and kind of see the opportunity beyond that. I think just really briefly, I'm going to say the big word is KYC. I think is kind of a big friction point in general. I think that's clearly a concern, and we'd be remiss not to mention it. I think that there is a friction element where certain people just don't actually have the documents necessary to do that KYC process from the ground up. I mean, certain parts of Africa, really the most like kind of reliable piece of information they have about themselves is their phone number. It's not necessarily a national ID number, and so that's kind of another element that really kind of adds to friction, kind of that whole system of how do we get them on chain.
Right.
I definitely agree with the language barrier, and I think this can pose two other challenges here. One is the education and awareness. I think currently maybe a lot of influencers, no matter individual or institutional, are speaking English. So we need people to bring the knowledge back to the countries. For example, bring this knowledge and translate it into African, translate it into Portugal or Espanol, and of course other countries included. So I guess the lack of education and also the awareness is definitely causing the language problem. And the second problem is even for English-speaking users, the adoption is still very low. Like, for example, MetaMask, one of the most popular wallet, has about 30 million monthly active users, but take a Web2 app as an example, like TikTok, it has 1 billion MAU. I think I've been thinking about why there's a gap between the users of using a wallet and using TikTok. Then I think the easiest answer is that because TikTok is easy to use, you don't have to do a lot of things, you just swipe it, right? But to use a MetaMask, you have to learn a lot of technical concepts, like a wallet on internet, right? And you have to remember all these recovering phrases, which makes no sense to most of the users that are already used to Web2 infrastructure. And so all of these are the barriers for users, for the next billion users to get on board into Web3.
So we solve for that by embracing something that was familiar and available to people, and that's their mobile phone. Most people don't realize this, but there's like 8 billion prepaid mobile SIM cards globally, and it over-indexes in emerging markets, specifically sub-Saharan Africa, where there's, I think, probably close to 1 billion SIM cards just there. And so in order to get a SIM card, a user has to go through a KYC process with their carrier, right? And so what we've done is put in place filters that don't allow people to bypass us as they onboard into our wallet. And the other thing too that's, going back to my analogy about the last few inches, it's, just because you sent someone $100 or $1 billion worth of crypto or USDC or USDT, that didn't mean they can actually do anything with it, right? They can't, and unlike traditional money, they can't eat, a token, right? The sort of the epiphany that we had at Fonbnk was that you can consume a unit of prepaid airtime. So as part of our onboarding process is that we actually give users a unit of prepaid airtime, and are, as in the same way that we can tokenize airtime into on the blockchain, we can also detokenize it and turn it back into a real consumable good. And so when you're dealing with really simple people, which by the way, they don't even read instructions in many cases. They look at these things, it's just like, is it so easy to use? You know, is it familiar with me? They could then click, and then they get like, oh, my phone was recharged. This is real, right? And so these are the types of things that we think about in terms of driving adoption and make it easy, but part of that is just make it familiar with people.
I think the big thing there is localizing infrastructure. I think that's the big word, is how do we actually localize that infrastructure so that it ties in exactly kind of the behaviors. And those behaviors are different even within African countries across the continent. So it's kind of something where you have 54 countries, you have 54 different types of behaviors at least. And so beyond that, Southeast Asia and Latin America, there's another whole kind of swath of behaviors there. So it's really kind of how do we localize that infrastructure.
And perhaps this is where our AI maxi friends come into play, right? As it relates to just automated translation, helping generally with the education gap, letting people have self-agency over querying, hey, you know, what the heck does this mean? Translate these docs to X, Y, or Z language. I do believe, you know, that's one of the key use cases and generally why there's so much excitement around that. But there will be a lot of windfalls in our industry as a result. And so, yeah, thank you for answering that one. I would love to switch gears a little bit and just hear maybe more of a personal story or an anecdote or just a key learning that you've had as we've all worked in distinct geographies, distinct markets. Would love, you know, for you guys to share with our audience just maybe a key learning that you've had throughout your experience in doing what you're doing.
I can start. I think if you're not in Brazil, you're missing something. That would be my first key learning. But for example, I was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago, and I was discussing with a Saudi company, one of the leading fintechs in this space, what they are doing, and they are doing like credit card receivables and some stuff. And that happened in Brazil like 5-7 years ago, and then the industry evolved a lot since then. And now it's heading to tokenizing the receivables so we can use them as a on-chain operation, and you can split, you can aggregate, and you can create another financial products on top of that. So I'm saying that in Brazil, what we see is that the transformation, it's part of the evolution of the financial industry, and we are learning many things. And in the previous panel, they were discussing about QAC, for example. But to do a QAC from a company, in Brazil, you have like some specific stuff that you need to do that's not so simple. How you name the administrator of the company, if it's called like administrator, or if it's called manager. So how you can automate that. So there are like a few specific tricky points that we are learning on how we can onboard companies, how we can onboard institutional investors, how we can onboard people, retail investors, in order to use a solution. So there are many nice things being developed there.
I'll share our brief founding story, which is sort of my big takeaway and why we got into Fonbnk. But it actually started as a bet with my brother-in-law who'd gone to Kenya on vacation, and he had a Safaricom SIM card. And if you're familiar with Safaricom, they own the mobile money service M-Pesa, which many of us have been students of for many years, but I'd actually never seen it in action. Anyway, I plug in the SIM into my phone. I see that there's like 1,000 shilling balance remaining, and he tells me how you could transfer airtime P2P in network, and it looked as if, you know, the phone worked perfectly in the US on roaming. And so I devised this hack where I took out some Facebook ads targeting people on the ground in Kenya that liked Safaricom and M-Pesa, and actually the next day I got a bill from Facebook, and I was going to turn it off. I didn't think anything of it, but I noticed a couple people had responded. And so I quickly invite them into a WhatsApp group, and using the M-Pesa account and the Safaricom SIM, I sold the airtime after a brief negotiation. And the epiphany was, wow, I was able to get, not only was I able to get stranded asset on, get liquidity for a stranded asset on the other side of the world, but here was this public network that was available globally and that was common, you know, through the common carrier treaties and so forth. I was able to effectively perform my first tokenization in sort of an MVP crude way. And, you know, I think with that, I would encourage people to think about what are these sort of common global rails that we can look at and use this technology to essentially thread all these various needles.
I think, yeah, for like one of the big things I learned was that you kind of have to unlearn a number of things. I came from TradFi originally, and I think that there was kind of like a lot of things that I kind of came to expect and kind of understand, and then especially kind of on the tech side, one of the things I think the biggest learnings is that you don't actually have to automate everything. There's a lot of things which are you're better off being manual. So just kind of give like an anecdote around this is that a lot of local banking infrastructure is really unreliable and notoriously unreliable. Sometimes banks run out of liquidity on Wednesdays and you don't actually have liquidity until next week. And so you can't make a transfer there. So if you have an automated system where you're just doing APIs on and off ramps there, well, if that happens, you're kind of SOL, right? So that was really kind of one of the things where we kind of took a step back and said, wait, how do we actually harness kind of the organized chaos in some way of the agent network and kind of have the opportunity where we always have this anti-fragile system where we can really kind of move the payments through other rails when there are kind of these friction points and kind of hurdles that arise in the market, which they do.
And I can share one of the observations we see from the change in user behaviors. Now, in crypto, most users are at the in the circumstances where they prefer easy over better. So previously, builders might want to build what is the best for the users, right? I have the most fancy technologies. I have used the most advanced infrastructure, but maybe the process for users to use is also becoming complicated as the technology becomes more advanced. And we observe that users actually prefer easy over better, which means if I have a dappA and dappB, dappB might give me maybe 5% yield APY, and dappA give me 4.5. But to use dappA, I only have to spend 12 seconds. And to use the dappB, I have to go through a whole onboarding process, which can take up to an hour. Guess who will win the end? It's no doubt, right? It's dappA, right? So motivated by this, we at dappOS is trying to maximize or minimize the complication of users and maximize the user experiences. And that's how we can get more users on board.
Beautiful. They say time is money, and I 100% agree. And with that, we're out of time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.